Hey everybody, this is Javi, and you are watching and listening to the Inner Child Collective, where you and your inner child heal for the better. Welcome. How are you? As you can see, I am in a new place. I just finally moved out of my previous residence, or from my previous residence. I'm like really stoked about it. There was a lot going on at that particular apartment, and now I'm in a safer place where I can thrive. I'm living with my housemate, who is like one of my best friends, and our cats are getting along. So everything is like pretty much copacetic at this point. And so like there's a lot of good changes coming through and have been happening as a result of this move. So I'm just really excited, and I hope that everyone else is doing very well. Um, those who are watching the show or not watching the show or listening or whatever, I hope everyone is doing all right, especially with everything that's going on these days. So today we're going to be talking about the inner child and the trauma brain, and we have a lot to cover with that because it's just very important to understand the trauma brain and how it operates um, and how it can work against us and how it can actually work for us as well. And so let's get started with that. So let me introduce myself. For those who don't know who I am, I am a psychic, intuitive medium, and author who specializes in inner child therapy. And the way I work is I place a strong emphasis on the generational and historical trauma we experience as children. I discuss the archetypes we've adopted and internalized as a result of the trauma. And I also focus on the unconscious stories we tell ourselves about the self as adults and how we can actually rewrite those stories when we connect to the inner child. So a quick reminder for those who are just tuning in as well. If you're a fan of the show or become a fan of the show, please leave a review wherever you are listening to it, because it gives me an idea as to what you're into, what you get out of the show, how you feel about the content, so on and so forth. It's just another way for us to connect. And also, if you have a question and you'd like to have it read on air, you can email your question to the innerchildcollective@gmail.com. Or if you follow me on Instagram or Facebook or whatnot, you can just leave your message or leave your comment rather when you see the Q&A logo on my social media pages. You can send them in anonymously. You don't have to be named at all. In fact, a lot of people prefer that. So I'll just in fact, that's what I'll do anyway. I just want to let you know that you have the choice. So on that note, let's get started. So what's going to be covered today is a few things, some very important things. We're going to be talking about what trauma brain is, how trauma rewires the brain, and also the importance of decolonizing the mind through the inner child work that we're going to be doing. And also, I'll give you some examples of a method that I use that is very effective. And I'll tell you about a lot of other modalities as well. So what is trauma brain, right? What is it? How does it, work? How does we work with it? How do we don't work with it, right? But this is what trauma brain is. So trauma brain is a brain that has been biochemically restructured due to being exposed to consistent traumatic experiences. So trauma affects three areas of the brain. So you have the prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking center. In fact, for those who are spiritual, that's where our third eye energy is. That's our basically the frontal cortex. That's where our third eye is located. Then you have the anterior cingulate cortex, the emotion regulation center. Basically, that's where our emotions are stored. And then you have the amygdala, which is a fear center. And I'll explain, what each of those are in detail in a minute. So here we go. The prefrontal cortex. This is our thinking center. So it's basically responsible for our executive functioning and how we express ourselves, right? Also controls our planning, problem solving, rational thinking, personality, and how we present ourselves to the external world. And so basically, what I mean by the external world, or externally rather, is how we show up in the world, is how other people see us and how we view ourselves, as a result of our problem solving, rational thinking, planning, and how it just controls how we show up in the world. And so when this area of the brain is functioning properly, we're able to think clearly, we're able to make sound, rational decisions, and we're aware of ourselves and others. We're aware of who we are and the and how other people perceive how we are. Then you have the anterior cingulate cortex, which is the emotional regulation center. It helps individuals regulate their emotions. Um, has a close working relationship with the thinking brain. So the rational part and the emotional part of our brain work closely together, which is why the way we show up in the world has everything to do with is very much tied to our emotions and our personality and how other people perceive us, right? And when that part of the brain is functioning properly, we can manage um, difficult and overwhelming thoughts. And also, we can prevent ourselves from overacting or reacting to the due to the inappropriate behaviors of other people and comments of other people. In other words, we're not taking if someone else is acting a fool, if someone else is just doing the most and they're saying and doing inappropriate things, whether it's, you know, about us or to someone else, we don't internalize it. We don't take it on as our own. Okay. So that's what that means. And then you have the amygdala, right? That's the fear center. I really like that word. To be honest, can I geek out for a little bit? The amygdala, I really like that word. It sounds very sci-fi, but that's neither here nor there, right? But that is our fear center, okay? That's our fear center, excuse me. So that part of the brain is what receives all external information that we're exposed to. Anything outside of us, our brain is taking that in, and that actually determines the fear center, the amygdala, helps us determine if something or someone is a threat. So if something is coming at us, it helps us determine whether or not that person, place, or situation is safe, or the elements of that person, place, or situation is safe. And if not, it produces this fear in us, so we are able to react. Okay, so an example, if we see a car coming towards us, at a fast pace, you know, we will see that our brain, our fear center will see that as a threat, and then we act as if, right? So when the amygdala is activated and is functioning properly, we are afraid, we are reactive, we are vigilant, we are able to react to anything that is deemed a threat, right? And is able, a healthy amygdala is actually able to properly process what is a fear and what is it, and do so in a way that will not have us overreact, right? It doesn't see everything as a fear. It sees certain things as a fear based on how that external stimuli or stimulus is coming towards us, right? So to talk about a little bit about trauma and how it rewires the brain, when our brains are exposed to trauma, with our brain. I don't know why I'm brains, right? I've been watching too many gangster movies. Okay, but when our brain is exposed to trauma, and especially consistently, the three important components of the brain becomes rewired. Right, they begin to rewire. They begin to cross a little bit, and so the prefrontal frontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex is very much activated or underactivated, right? And the amygdala is overactivated. In other words, the thinking and emotional regulation centers of our brain become underdeveloped. They become arrested due to the inability to make sense of or to express healthy emotions around the traumatic experience. So when you are in the throes of your trauma or the trauma event, or you're going through some sort of emotional abuse, sexual abuse, or excuse me, or religious abuse, any sort of trauma, especially if it's consistent and you're not able to express those emotions, um, something we get stuck in time. We get stuck um, in that energy. And so what ends up happening is that it leaves an imprint on us. And with that imprint, and because of that imprint and because of the situation, our thinking and emotional regulation centers become very arrested, and we end up being stuck in that moment because we're not able to talk about it. We're not able to do anything um, with that energy and how we feel about that situation. And so when we can't express our emotions, or we're not given the support to express ourselves in toxic environments, we don't feel safe anymore. We do not feel safe, and our fear center believes that we're under a constant threat, which is why we have difficulties regulating emotions. We have difficulty sleeping or being in a relaxed state. We have difficulty with focus and concentration, which is something we're going to be addressing in a short minute. We also have a fear. We develop a fear of certain types of people, places, and situations, which is why a lot of us who have gone through any sort of trauma, especially childhood trauma, we have a tendency to hold on to the story. And also, when we hold on to the story, we develop things like PTSD, OCD, in some cases DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, or it used to be called split personalities, when you have multiple people, your brain splinters, and multiple people, you have multiple alters that take part in your brain and live in your brain, and you become that person whenever you are triggered, right? Because, or a group of people, depending on what you're going through. And we'll talk about that in a minute, or mention that in a minute rather. But we become fearful of certain places, people, and situations. One of the reasons why that happens with a lot of adults is because of our childhood stuff. And so that also brings on addiction sometimes, addiction to drugs, alcohol, sex, food, porn, video games, etc. Because sometimes when our amygdala is overactive, we end up developing coping mechanism and defense mechanisms to protect ourselves and basically to escape. So that's what addiction is about. And so we can definitely talk about that in the future as well. And also there's mental health issues, depression, PTSD, OCD, DID, etc. So we can talk a little bit about the brain function of children, right? When we're children, our brains operate with two brain waves. In fact, is stronger in children because they're children, right? When we're kids, our brains are wired differently, just simply because we have not experienced the world yet, for the most part, depending on when, our environment and who we're around, so on and so forth. Anyway, we have the tendency to operate with two brain waves, right? There's the alpha, which helps us experience the present moment and helps us stay in the present moment to experience the present moment, and works with the conscious mind. Basically, the thoughts that that first pop into our mind, the ones that don't necessarily drive our behavior, but it's the thought that pops into your mind, right? It's the first thing you think about. That's the conscious mind, because you're conscious of that thought. Then we have theta. The theta brain waves are activated during meditation, prayer, spiritual experiences, being in a quiet state, in a daydream state, and it actually works with our unconscious mind. Now, our unconscious mind is what we talk about a lot. Like I always talk about this. That is where our unspoken thoughts are stored and living. Okay, they're not just stored there, they're living there. And that's where our inner child is. And also that's where those are the thoughts and the messages that drive our behavior, but we're unaware of that. Okay. So between the ages of 2 and 6, children use the theta brainwaves to internalize information received regarding themselves in the world from our caregivers, our friends, religious and spiritual communities, educational institutions, schools, um, or daycares. The daycares are also educational, and you have the wider community, basically like your neighborhood, like the world in general. And so when we're exposed to persistent abuse and trauma, the brain of the child is affected. For one, the fear center becomes overactive. So basically you have the flight, freeze, fright response, and that's how because your brain is seeing something as a threat, consistently as as a consistent threat, especially if the abuse that we endured as children is very much is persistent and very consistent and is very interpersonal in nature. And also you have the emotion regulation center becoming dysregulated. So children who are constantly abused or exposed to some sort of trauma, whether it be acute trauma or complex trauma, um, or I really forget, it's like acute trauma, um, complex trauma, or like, you know, or constant, like it's just constant, right? Um, the child would develop those coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms to deal with the trauma, whether it be emotional withdrawal or lashing out in anger, or playing video games, or just going into a daydream state, or pretending to be somebody else that they're not. So that plays a huge role in that. And then the thinking center becomes underdeveloped. Child has issues concentrating or staying engaged with the outside world. That, in fact, when that happens, when a child has issues with concentrating, or have issues staying engaged with the outside world, that's actually them being the abandoned, or picking up the abandoned child, or internalizing, excuse me, the abandoned child archetype. So most or not the I'm sorry, the not the abandoned child archetype, but the eternal child archetype. Okay, the magical child. And the magical child is always engaged. It has a issue with staying engaged with the outside world. The magical child is like this. So then there's like the loss of identity, personality, and personal autonomy, because what ends up happening is that um, once you start living with like a lot of trauma, like consistent and persistent trauma like that, especially if it's happening and it involves you being abandoned or having a fear of being abandoned, what ends up happening with that child is that they lose their identity, because of trauma begins to shape them and mold them into somebody they're not. They start to lose a sense of who they are, because they are in defense mode, they're in survival mode at that point. And so they'll do anything and everything to make everything right, with their abuser or abusers. And it can come out as people pleasing. It can come out as people pleasing, denying their own emotions, denying who they are, so on and so forth. So that's what happens when the thinking center becomes underdeveloped. And what ends up happening is that emotion dysregulation starts to happen, because of in fact, people pleasing comes as a result of the emotion regulation center being dysregulated. Because if you are able to express your emotions, or you feel like whatever's going on is your fault, what ends up happening is that um, your thinking center becomes underdeveloped, simply because you always thinking that something is your fault, and you end up thinking like that. Okay, so that's what ends up happening when the emotional regulation center and the thinking center cross wires, and begins a dysfunction, you know like that. So here's the trauma brain in the adult. We're going to talk a bit about that, because this is extremely important, because I feel like a lot of adults do not, they realize they don't have trauma. They may or may not realize that they have trauma brain, um, because they're in survival mode. And so a lot of the times, adults with trauma brain often have difficulty coping with their reality. So most trauma survivors develop unhealthy coping and defense mechanisms. Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it comes on the form of over shopping, or biting your nails, or not wanting to pay bills because you're afraid of money, because of what your money being stolen when you were a child, or you went through some sort of financial abuse, so on, or something of that nature. So we end up developing a lot of unhealthy coping and defense mechanisms, becoming angry all the time, crying all the time just to get out of things, you know, um, being afraid of taking responsibility. That's a coping mechanism or defense mechanism to avoid conflict. You also have or had unhealthy friendships or relationships. There are many people with trauma brain who do not know how to communicate with their emotions. They don't know how to communicate with their words because their thinking center and emotional center, regulation center, is very much underdeveloped. So what ends up happening is that they're not able to maintain relationships because that involves um, or interpersonal relationships because that involves rationality, that involves taking into considerations communications and someone's more vulnerability and emotional state. And sometimes we're not able to do that in regards to other people, and so we end up sabotaging a lot of our relationships and friendships because we feel like we don't deserve those type of companionships or relationships. We also feel that those people are going to abandon us, especially if you have abandoned child archetype energy. You would think that someone's trying to leave you all the time. And so you would rather sabotage that relationship than be vulnerable. Then you have the inability to maintain employment. There's a lot of us because we have issues with authority, or we have issues with working with other people because we have emotional dysregulation or a thinking center that is not regulated or functioning very well. So we have the tendency to get into it with our coworkers, with our boss, not able to maintain our job, may not even like our job, and feel like we're just doing things for survival, and we end up sabotaging our employment as a result of that. You also have the difficulty taking responsibility or holding themselves accountable for behavior. So basically, a lot of us who do not like conflict have the tendency to avoid responsibility or hold ourselves accountable because we feel like someone is going to leave us, or we feel like this is really reminiscent and very prevalent among those uh, who have wounded child energy. A lot of us do not want to take responsibility or hold ourselves accountable for our behavior because we feel like it is justified. We feel like a lot of our stuff is justified because we didn't get justice as children. Therefore, we're going to get justice today by any means necessary. So that's where that comes from as well. Or we unnecessarily shoulder responsibility or accountability for others' behavior. This is a lot of the over apologizing, taking responsibility for somebody else's stuff, um, and holding ourselves accountable for things we didn't do. That is a lot of people. That is people pleasing behavior, and that's trauma, and that's a result of having trauma brain and being exposed to people who are constantly blaming you for your own abuse and constantly blaming you for what happened to you. We unnecessarily blame ourselves for things that other people have done to us. And we end up making excuses for behaviors. This is really, really prevalent among those who have gone through a lot of emotional and psychological abuse. Having people, who have abused them tell them that they, in some way, shape, or form, are the reason why they were raped, molested, why they were being hit, um, why they are having, certain privilege taken away, even though the child did not deserve it. Like somebody didn't reach their goals and their dreams, you're blamed for that as a child. So we end up shouldering a lot of other people's stuff because our trauma brain tells us that, for one, it is our responsibility to fix this issue. And secondly, it is our fault that the issue occurred. Okay. So the good news is about trauma brain, though, is that it can be rewired when we connect with our inner child. And their negative talk and the messages they have received. Okay. So here's the importance of decolonizing the mind through inner child work. The important component to regulating and managing trauma brain is having that mind body spirit connection. And the reason why this is so important is because when we are in the thick of our trauma, in the thick of survival mode, we are disconnected from our mind, our body, and our spirit because we've received the unspoken messages, or those messages, whether they're spoken or unspoken, by the folks who have, you know, caused us to have trauma, or trauma brain, that somehow our bodies belong to them. Our minds and our bodies and our spirits belong to them, and we are ours to abuse and to manipulate. And so we end up having, this is very prevalent among those who have been sexually abused. So those who have been sexually abused really feel like their bodies aren't theirs, and they become disconnected from their mind and their body and their spirit because they feel like they have no agency. So one way to regulate and manage trauma brain and to rewire the brain is to become connected to your mind, your body, and your spirit. So you can be in touch with your emotions, and you can be in touch with your thoughts, and you can be in touch with who you really are on a spiritual level. It's the key component, the most important part of healing. And then regulating and managing trauma brain required childhood abuse survivors. It requires you to decolonize your subconscious mind where harmful self-talk and thoughts about the self live. Your subconscious, unconscious mind, that's where your inner child lives. And they're still holding on to those messages they have received as children. And when you're carrying around those thoughts for years upon years upon years, they shape you. You're not only your brain, but they shape your body, and they also shape your spirit. And it's because your subconscious mind is to be decolonized. And the reason being is because the false messages that affect our brain really do result from generational and historical trauma that our caregivers and our communities have not healed from. And those false messages that affect our brain come from those unfamiliar with their own personal, political, and spiritual power. I cannot emphasize enough that generational and historical trauma plays a huge part in how we view ourselves, how we view each other. Those false messages that have been told to us as we were children, and I'm going to keep saying this, right? Those messages come from white supremacist ideologies regarding the self. And that stems from a certain group of people who did not see their own divinity, let alone the divinity of others that they have oppressed, dehumanized, and humiliated over the centuries. So a lot of those messages that we have received, our families and our ancestors have received from our oppressors, have been passed down from one generation to the next, to the point where our entire communities, the Black community, the brown community, like marginalized and colonized people, have internalized a lot of those white supremacist ideologies. And so now they are passing them down to us. They passed them down to us when we were children. And a lot of of our attributes have been weaponized against us. A lot of our intersections have been weaponized against us because generational and historical trauma has taught our ancestors that our differences are something to be afraid of and to be ashamed of. This is one of the reasons why a lot of us are called fat. A lot of dark-skinned people are called ugly. light-skinned people are seen as better than even within our own communities because white slave masters told them that they were better, and so they just have their self-esteem is based on that. Their self-worth is based on that. Why there's so much poverty in the world, how why there's like a lot of food scarcity in the world, how and how we are not, and how our bodies are, you know, scrutinized as children. We're too big, we're too small, we're not worth anything. We get all those messages because of generational and historical trauma, and white supremacy is the reason why, and that lack of divinity that a certain group of people did not see in themselves is why we're going through this. So those false messages are stored in our brain and in our DNA. And as a result, a lot of our ancestors and a lot of our immediate family members and even our communities, they're unfamiliar with their own personal political and spiritual power, so they don't know anything about equity, like true equity, political and spiritual and personal equity. So they put a lot of pressure and a lot of those negative messages into our minds because they did not have the opportunity or have not given themselves the opportunity to heal from that generational and historical trauma. And when we are decolonizing our mind, we are breaking the cycle by getting rid of those messages and really examining those messages and understanding where they've come from and understanding that they did not come from us and they don't belong to us either. So one method that I use that helps me decolonize my inner child's trauma brain is listing negative self-talk messages and writing a positive truth beneath the negative message. So how I do this writing exercise is um, first of all, buy a notebook. I bought a notebook that is used exclusively for inner child work. In fact, I'll show you my notebook here. This is what it looks like. You can get one anywhere. So you can buy a notebook and use it exclusively for inner child work. You find a quiet place where you will not be disturbed, because this also involves meditation, like doing a lot of meditative work around your thoughts and thinking about what is coming through and what messages are very consistent, right? After taking a few deep breaths, list a few negative thoughts to tell yourself. I recommend at least, if you're starting out, maybe 3 or 4, so you're not overwhelming yourself and you're not familiar with this exercise. But once you begin to become familiar with the format, you can do as many as you want without overwhelming yourself. Then write negative thoughts you tell yourself. After taking a few deep breaths, list a few negative thoughts you tell about yourself. And then write a positive truth under each false message to disprove it. And then read those false messages and positive truths. Read them out loud if you so choose. The reason why I say read them out loud if you so choose, because your words do have power. Your words have power, and so do your voice. So when you start reading, you start to realize how powerful your thoughts have been and how much power you have given these negative thoughts, and how much power you can give the positive messages as well, that positive truth. So here's an example I have from my own notebook, just to give you a heads up, just to give you a little bit of what it looks like. So the negative self-talk I told myself is that I will always be bullied, because I was also um, I'm a bully survivor, and I was also a bully growing up. So I tell myself, the negative messages I was telling myself is that I will always be bullied. But the positive truth is I have people in my life who would never subject me to this type of violence, and I don't allow it either. I have stood up for myself, my inner child, and others on numerous occasions. I do this because of the trauma I've been through throughout the years. I also learned not to take things personal, as the physical and psychological violence was never about me. Now I read everything. Like, I read the negative message and the positive truth three times out loud, because of the spiritual power of three. The number three represents completion and transformation. So I read it three times, and I feel the energy of the positive truth, because I recognize how powerful and how even ridiculous the negative talk, the self-talk, is. And I know for a fact that is, and I recognize by speaking the positive truth around three times, that the negative self-talk, that's negative message, it never belonged to me. That happened because of somebody else's behavior towards me. And that helps me recognize that, reading it out loud. So with that being said, this is an important note regarding to those who are neurodivergent or believe that they are neurodivergent. Many of those who have trauma brain may also be neurodivergent, and that is someone who has been diagnosed with, ADD or ADHD, and or any other learning disorder or learning disability. I don't like using that word. It's not a disorder or disability, but I'm learning, right? So, though childhood abuse survivors, can be neurodivergent, we also have to recognize the impact trauma has had on our biochemistry. Your brain is literally being rewired due to your experiences, or have been rewired during your experiences. Remember, because your thinking center is very much affected by the trauma, um, it it affects your focus and concentration. It focuses your memory. It focuses how you view the world. It's one of the reasons why a lot of us have a hard time with, planning. A lot of us have a problem with planning, coming up with a rational thought, with short-term memory. A lot of us have issues with focus and concentration and staying on task, not being able to, you know, regulate your emotions, because a lot of people with ADD, ADHD also have issues with emotion dysregulation. So be aware that trauma also has a part in, um, how our brains work. And the reason why I mention this is because there is a possibility that those struggling with executive functioning and emotion dysregulation may not be neurodivergent, but just have trauma brain. We also have another reason why I mentioned this part is because we have the tendency to self-diagnose where we are disconnected from our mind, our body, and spirit. Where we're disconnected from those three important components of the self, and we want answers that we're not familiar with the impact of trauma has on our biochemistry, and on our bodies, and on our mind, and our overall spirit. When we're not familiar with the impact of trauma, or we are not familiar with how trauma, has shaped us and have affected us on every level, even on the, you know on a on the level of our DNA, on the molecular structure. we have the tendency to diagnose because we just want to know what's going on with us and why are we like this. We're very quick to always find out what's wrong with us, and we have the tendency with everything, with all this information about ADD, ADHD, and dyslexia, and all these other neurological disorders, um, or neurological things that we have going on. Sometimes we have to, we have the tendency to self-diagnose, and those who, and just to let you know that people who do believe they have ADD, ADHD, or anything pertaining to being a neurodivergent, um, any person that you go to for an evaluation, they're going to take into consideration that trauma may have had a huge part in your focus and concentration. Just to put that out there. Also, like, this is also very important, when we begin to decolonize our mind by being aware of how negative thoughts take up space in our minds begin to declutter itself, because we hold on to a lot. Our brain has so much, like, it only has so much storage space, right? It really does. It can only hold on to certain thoughts for a while, and before we tend to forget. And so what ends up happening, is that when we start to decolonize our mind by writing down those thoughts, reading out those thoughts out loud, and just pretty much, you know, managing our trauma brain, just by decluttering it, our concentration may get or more. I bet you that your concentration is more likely to, and your focus is more likely to become better or increase at least slightly. Now, if you have been diagnosed and you are taking medication, that's fine. I'm not telling anyone to stop taking their medication. I just want to put that out there right now. I'm not telling anyone to do all that. But what I am saying is that, in addition to the medication that you may be taking, decolonizing your mind and decluttering it will also help with focus and concentration. Okay? So, with that being said, it is time for us to take a break, because I just threw a lot of stuff at you, to be honest with you. So, um, anyway, let's take a short break, and I will be back with the questions and answers from listeners. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Hey, this is Javi, and you are watching and listening to the Inner Child Collective, where you and your inner child heal for the better. We are going to be doing the Q&A. Welcome. And so I'm really excited about that. I just had a couple of folks turn in questions. So shout out to them, right? And so just to let you know that if you have any questions or comments that you would like to have written on the show, by all means, let me know. Just email me. And you can also reach out to me on my social media pages when you see the Q&A logo. So let's get started with this. Like, I'm really excited about these questions. Hey, everybody. So today, someone asked, here's the first question rather. What do you think about Kamala Harris? Tell us how you really feel. LOL. So this question is regarding to the vice presidential candidate, vice presidential candidate, excuse me, Kamala Harris. And so she ran for president this year and didn't quite make it. And so now she is running for vice president with Joe Biden. And so, like, I had to do a lot of research on her. I knew a little bit about her, and when I did find out, I wasn't too keen on. And so I just wanted to put prejudice aside and just, like, or bias society, just do research. And so it just seemed to me like, just based on what I've read, like, I don't trust her intentions. I don't, based on her track record and what I've researched, I really don't trust her intentions. And the reasons being is that she contradicts herself on many of the issues she's supposed to be passionate about. So she said that she created a proposal for Kamala Care, which at first did not involve private insurance companies. But when progressives and private insurance companies criticized her, she like changed her stance. And so that was very just that was very jarring, first and foremost. And so then, as I was doing research, I found that she claims that she wanted to address racial justice and discrimination, but avoided taking cases involving killings by cops while working as a California district attorney. She also stated she was against the death penalty in the state of California, but appealed the judge's ruling when they said that it was unconstitutional, or they found it unconstitutional. And she knows of the sexual misconduct accusations against Biden, said that she believed the victims. And so why is she working with him? She is now his VP candidate. So it just seems to me like that was like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? That was one thing. And then now she's like, I also found her to be anti-progressive, and she fails to fully support marginalized and colonized people. Like, she co-sponsored, Sesta Fosta, which is a law that placed, you know, sex workers at risk, continues to do so after they got rid of, Craigslist and other classified ads that a lot of, sex workers use to screen their clients to keep themselves safe and to have agency so they don't have to worry about pimps. They took that away. And now a lot of them have to do street work or do something more discreet in order to make their money. And that also includes trans and non-binary um, sex workers who definitely relied on those resources to remain safe. Um, for those who don't know, trans and non-binary folks are more likely to lose jobs, and they are more likely to, support themselves in this manner, as a means of survival. And so Sessa Foster kept a lot of those folks safe, and she co-sponsored that bill and has no regrets. Um, Harris also, as a district attorney, she threatened to jail parents for up to a year and issue a $2,000 fine if children miss more than 10% of schools in a day, or in a year rather. And that usually happens to a lot of Black and brown parents whose children, for whatever reason, are very tardy for school. And so, or missing school. And so they do that here in Rochester, in New York State as well, at least in Rochester anyway, that if a child misses a certain amount of days of school within a year, they have a cop come to the house. I forgot what they're like, a truancy cop, a truancy cop. Should so yeah, they have a truancy cop come to the house. And so that really doesn't help matters. You know what I mean? Because there could be definitely a reason why that child is not going to school. So to put that extra pressure on, on parents is not okay, especially if those parents are Black and brown and they don't have, the resources to get their kids in school on time, right? Get to school on time. And then even though she supported marriage equality, she doesn't support the medical needs of a trans female inmate. I don't know why I'm having issues talking right now. But yeah, that's just a smidget of what I've research and what I've seen so far. There are other things too that will kind of put me on pause. So I'm not saying that she's a bad person, and I'm not saying that, that she's evil or anything like that. I'm not even saying this, to, sway anyone's vote or whatnot. You can vote for who you want to vote for. But I also feel too that in order for me to feel comfortable voting for this particular candidate or any sort of candidate, they have to hold there are certain criteria they have to, have in order for me to feel comfortable. And I'm just not going to sit here and vote for anybody. And I'm going to sit here. I'm not going to sit here and lie to y'all. Like, I'm not here for this, right? And y'all, I'm not going to allow anyone to, sway me either way. So, and I feel that, and I'm really, really, really weary of centrists anyway. Like, she's a Democratic centrist. And that tells me right there that she can go either way. She can vote, on something conservative, but she can vote on something progressive as well. And so, depending on, it just seems to me that she's easily swayed by other people's perceptions of her, And so, why I would want that I would want that type of person as a vice president. We already had that. We already dealt with that. We dealt with that with Obama, where he was just like very somewhat of a centrist, where he can go either way. And he said, and I'm not just saying this, to bash this person or anything like that. I don't know him, but I just feel like what all the things that he said he was going to do, he did not do. You know what I'm saying? Like, even though he did some wonderful things with like healthcare and marriage equality, it just seems to me like at this point that's not necessarily something that is going to be the only thing that says, and yeah, I'm gonna vote for this person, yes, I'm gonna vote for that person. And I also feel like Kamala Harris, actually, she's big business. She supports big businesses. Otherwise, why would she, change her stance when it comes to private insurance, when it comes to like the Kamala Care or Obamacare? You know what I'm saying? Like, why would she change her stance? Just simply because um, it just seemed to me like um, I don't even know if I may have like, I think the progressives criticized her because she was just. I just feel like she is about my big businesses, and it feels like to me when people um, tend to criticize her, she just backs up. You know what I mean? And I really don't believe that she feels that she is as tough as she says as she is on certain things. It's just a lot of contradictions that make me extremely uncomfortable, and I just feel like she goes where the power is, basically. So long story short, like, it's a no for me, dog. For real, it's a no for me. It makes me nervous when people like go back and forth like that, and I have an issue with centrists who do that. In fact, I have an issue with centrists in general. I'm not here for moderates. I'm definitely like a progressive leftist, very much a radical leftist. So I'm not here for any sort of. I'm not here for tiptoeing. Either you're for the people or you're not. And she doesn't seem to be for the people at all. So that's my take on that, right? So let's move on to the next question. So the next question is, what is a good way to incorporate our ancestors into healing childhood traumas? I was molested and was never told anyone, especially my grandparents. Because of my experience, I was afraid of men. It deeply affected my ability to trust anyone, especially if they were male. My relationships suffered. So one way, I have a few ways for you to um, I have a few answers for that, and a few ways to incorporate your ancestors is, for one, work with the highest and the best of your ancestors, those who had your best interests at heart. I know that certain folks, especially in the Hoodoo community, a lot of people work with all of their ancestors, right? All of their, um, everyone on their bloodline. Not everyone's comfortable doing that, and so it's up to you. And in fact, before, I should have said this before, just work with the highest and the best of your ancestors. Also work with the best of your spirit team as well. Like, they're a part of a spirit team. Okay. So always, when you're working with your ancestors, always incorporate spirit as well. Right. So like, when you are working with your ancestors, spirit is also a part of that, of that interaction. But always work with the highest and the best of your ancestors, and also create an ancestral altar and give offerings as much as you possibly can. I would give my my folks' offerings, and I not only like reach out to the highest and the best of my ancestors of this lifetime, but for many other lifetimes as well. And so I give them offerings as a means of showing gratitude. Establish a genuine connection with your ancestors by speaking to them. Basically, talk to your people, especially if they didn't even know what happened to you, because a lot of us, we go through these situations thinking that we're not going to be supported, by our families, but our ancestors are here to connect with us. They are here wanting to work with us, and you are to, speak with them and let them know what happened. Let them know what happened and introduce yourself. Um, Tell them about yourself, who you were, who you are today, and the trauma you experienced, right? Because if they don't know, they were not able to help you, but they can help you now. They can help you through the healing process if you tell them and be honest about what happened to you, right? Because I'm getting that, especially, I'm definitely getting like a message for this particular person who have, given me this question. Thank you, by the way, for doing that. And also, I'm getting that your grandparents, they would have loved you regardless of whether they known or not. And they are the ones who are going to help you heal. Please work with your grandparents, because your grandparents are really going to help you heal through that situation. They know, I'm getting that they know what type of child they were dealing with. They knew about, they didn't know about the molestation, but they knew they loved this child, but they knew um, that sometimes this child was hard-headed and did not listen to anybody. They had their own way of doing things. So your grandparents are going to be very sympathetic towards you and very empathetic towards you. I'm also getting to that they are going to be the bedrock, of your healing, because they love you very much. Okay, they definitely love you very much. And so I just want to let I definitely want you to let you know that. So please speak to your grandparents and let them in on your emotional state. Be honest about your emotions. Be honest about what's happening. Let them know about your anger. Let them know about what's going on with you. Let them know. Okay, please let them know, because the more you're honest and vulnerable with your ancestors, the more they're going to be able to help you heal. Okay, because that's basically, especially your grandparents, that's what they're here for. And if your inner child has questions for your ancestors, allow those questions to come through, because um, your inner child also wants to meet your grandparents. Your inner child wants you to know that they want to connect with you and connect with your ancestors. They want you to know that. So what's going to end up happening is that they're going to have questions of their own. They're going to come through, and so let them establish that connection with your ancestors as well. Because then they're going to be able to connect with that part of yourself as well, and help that that part of yourself, your inner child, heal their wounds as well. Okay. Yes, like it's going to be an extremely positive experience for you. It definitely is going to be a positive experience, and I'm looking very forward. I would like to, you know how this goes, but I definitely feel like this is going to be a huge deal, and it's going to be a huge deal in a very good way. All right, so that is all we have, y'all. Thank you so much for coming through. I really appreciate it. If you resonated with this episode or the topic in any way or anything about it, you can see. Basically, you can follow me, right? Follow me if you resonate with this episode. You can go to any of the YouTube or any of the podcast sites that are here and very much available to you. And so I'm looking forward to you leaving a review as well, because I would like to know what you think. Also, I'm on social media: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and all that stuff will be in the descriptions as well. So Thank you so much for your support. I really, really, really appreciate it. And also, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Just email me, Inner Child Collective, the Inner Child Collective, and gmail.com. Any questions you have about the inner child, politics, spirituality, healing, emotional state, anything that pertains to healing, even, um, especially spirituality. Like I said, I'm a psychic and intuitive medium, um, and author. So by all means, let me know if you would ever want to book a reading or whatnot. So thank you again for your support. And I really appreciate you. And until next time, peace.